What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. I have another special video. I've been talking a lot about Nexus devices, all those things. I'm going to be doing a lot more Nexus devices, all right? So just prepare for that. Today, right now, we're going to be looking at the Nexus 5, man, and this is a phone that, in my opinion, has probably been one of those phones that I looked up to at a time. I mean, like I said, if you watch that Nexus 4 video I did, I owned that phone for like 2 years. I enjoyed it like crazy. I had so much love for it, and I think if I didn't own that phone, maybe I would have like a hatred towards Android. I don't know. I'd be like, man, I hate Android, like this and that. But thank God I owned that phone, because that opened up a whole door for me of like way different devices. And even like the LG G2, that was a crazy thing too. And LG was the one who made the Nexus 5 as well. And you know what? LG kind of has a reputation of being kind of weird sometimes. But in terms of design at this day and age, in terms of 2013 when this thing was released, I will tell you the Nexus 5 was one of those devices that stood out like crazy. The minimalistic design, the price tag of it, which really wasn't even that expensive, because this was a phone that not only was super heavy in software, got software support like crazy, but the price tag was not even as high as many other flagships at the time. I believe when this thing was released, it was like a couple $100 compared to what we have now. You know, I think the Nexus 6P kind of took it to a different league, the Nexus 6 as well, which were the successors of this device. But the Nexus 5 itself, I mean, I just kind of want to see how it holds up so far, all those different things. Now, usually when I get a device, I keep it, I review it, then I resell it, or I give it away, or I end up just keeping it. This is one of those devices that I ended up keeping, mostly because of a reason that I actually ended up breaking it when I ROM'd it, but I was able to fix it, I think. But the Nexus 5, like I said, came out in 2013 in October. So this year, it will actually turn 6 years old, which is insane. I mean, think about it. Some of you watching this might have a kid that is younger than this phone, which is wild to think. And it just, in terms of the body itself, I will tell you, you know, you have to remember and you have to think back, 2013, phones weren't necessarily being like the best looking phones or even like the best feeling phones. This thing was basically built out of plastic, but so were like 99% of other phones at this time. I think the exceptions probably are like the iPhones, and even the Galaxies at this time, I think were still being made out of plastic. So you can't really blame Google and LG for making a phone that feels like this. But I don't really think this phone feels that cheap, but at the time of its release. But now, because this phone has gone through a lot of wear and tear, this phone is kind of creaking all over the place, and that's the problem with plastic phones. At the front, we have a 4.95-inch True HD IPS Plus panel. It was 1080p, and I will tell you, man, when I looked at the Nexus 5 panel, some of my friends had it. I'm like, that is a very, very sharp panel. But I had my Nexus 4 at the time, and I didn't really think it was that bad of a panel, I'll be honest. But the Nexus 5's panel was a huge increase, and even in 2019, I will probably say that yes, it's probably not the best looking thing ever. LG's display at this time were kind of, I think, light in a way. They weren't like sharp dark colors, they were kind of like mushy in a way. I don't really know the best terminology for it, but it wasn't a bad panel at all. And sometimes you were able to flash kernels and stuff that could change the profile of the display. That was pretty cool. You have a headphone jack on the bottom, a micro USB port, and on the front, for the longest time, I was like, the front camera is so weird, because you have like a front camera, then you have like another front camera, and at the time, dual front cameras weren't a thing. But I found out that that's actually an earpiece, as well as a proximity sensor on the side, and then the front camera on the left. So kind of a dumb thing. I was kind of an idiot back then. But overall, that's pretty much the body, man. And overall, man, it's not the best feeling thing, but at the time of its release, I really do think it was pretty decent feeling device, man. Now, in terms of software, this is where this phone really shined at. And here's the crazy thing, man. It started off with Android 4.0 ice cream sandwich. And I can't believe it even started off with that. I don't even believe that for some reason. But eventually, it was upgradable to Android Marshmallow, which is just one more version past the Nexus 4, and as expected. And in terms of software, obviously it's not supported anymore, but this thing was supported for a pretty long time. Google at this time still had the reputation of supporting their devices, and nonetheless the Nexus 5 got that support. But this is the better thing, okay? Right now there are several million custom ROMs out there. Obviously an over-exaggeration, but there are tons of ROMs out there for the Nexus 5, man. This is one of those phones that was so easy to root, so easy to custom ROM that, dude, even a grandma could do it, dude. And honestly, I just offended like 90% of grandmas out there. If you're a grandma and you're watching this video, just know I have so much love for you, all right? I didn't mean to offend you, but here's the thing, okay? With all that set aside, there's so many ROMs out there, okay? There's Android Marshmallow ROMs out for it, obviously. There's Android Nougat ROMs out for it. There's Android Oreo ROMs out for it. And here's a crazier thing. There's even Android Pie ROMs out for this thing. This phone came out in 2013, almost 6 years ago, and there's still a development community behind it. That's like the craziest thing ever. It's really hard for me to even think of like iPhones or like even other Android phones released in 2013 that are like still supported or even still have a community behind it. Very, very few come that far. And the Nexus line is one of those those phones that if you still own a Nexus 5, you're part of that community. Most likely you own it because you're flashing ROMs on it. I don't think you would be one of those people to own it that would not flash custom ROMs on it. Obviously do your research, flash the appropriate software and all that stuff, but I've rooted so many phones, I've custom ROMmed so many phones. They had so much life into it, and there's Lineage OS ROMs for it, 15.1. I guess if you want to, you can flash those, but again, Android Oreo is pretty safe too. Anything to get upgraded, man, I would definitely tell you this phone in terms of the software is up there. It's very, very cool that this thing is still supported even by third-party developers. Now in terms of the performance, okay, this thing has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 processor, a quad-core CPU, and Adreno 330 GPU, and 2 gigs of RAM. And what I'll tell you is that overall the performance really isn't that bad when you consider the year this thing was released and the price point of it right now. Obviously, I'm not saying this thing is extremely fast, and I've had faster phones than this that I've said were slow, because it just depends when these things were released and how expensive these things are. I factor both of those things in. Even phones that are faster than this, I've said before, they are slower or just not good in performance or whatever because of the price point or because of the year it was released. And the Nexus 5, I'll definitely say, isn't a horrible performing device, especially for its age. There's a lot of glitchiness every once in a while, especially if you flash a custom ROM. There's going to be a lot of problems. There's going to be some problems here and there. You might have some glitched frames, you might have some apps crashing, but that's pretty, you should expect that by now. But I don't think the performance is really that bad. I mean, if you're using it for a day-to-day purpose, you will probably not notice it being horrible, but at the same time, I would probably tell you, like, if you're expecting the moon and back and expecting even like above average performance, you probably will not get it from the Nexus 5, if I'm being honest. The RAM is probably one of those things that kind of hurts it the most. It's only 2 gigs, so you're already going to be out of RAM for the most part, loading up some pretty intensive apps. So that's the main thing about performance. Obviously gaming is kind of there too. It's pretty slow depending on which games you play. Games like Pew Pew run okay. Games like Real Racing 3 do tend to lag a lot, and that's kind of the times we're in. It's going to be kind of that case for a long time. So what I'll tell you is overall performance, I would rate it in the middle of the road. It's not the greatest thing ever, but I guess for 2013 flagship budget phone, it's definitely on the better side of things. All right, I'll just leave it at that. But again, if you flash a kernel on it, the performance can get better, or you can even underclock it to save battery. It really just depends on how you feel. Now in terms of the camera, I'm going to hit on it super quickly. I really don't think it's a good camera. It's an 8 megapixel sensor. You have optical image stabilization. You can shoot 1080p videos on it, but overall I don't think it was that good of a camera. The crazy thing is that LG made the LG G2 and the G3, and those phones had pretty good cameras, and even now when I use them, I'm like, dude, they're pretty solid cameras. But for some reason the Nexus 5, LG, I guess, put in their worst sensor they had. Like, yeah, I can take photos and everything, but I mean overall it's not that good. You have a 1.3 megapixel camera on the back, and again, overall not that good. But for a phone of this caliber, I don't want to take too much away from it. I like it. I think the Nexus 5 is a legend, so the camera overall, it's okay. Now moving on to the battery life, all right? I'll be honest, 2,300 milliamp hour battery, really not that good. I've even heard it at that time. There were a lot of problems with the battery, random shutdowns, things like that. What I will tell you is that is probably the truth. I never owned the Nexus 5 as a main device, so I have no experience with that, but that's what people have been saying, and that's pretty common with LG phones. I owned the LG G2 that had a lot of problems during the end of its life, and if you're going to get a Nexus 5, expect to have problems in terms of hardware. That's probably the main thing. Now, you could get a Lemon and have no problems with it, but from what the main things I've been hearing, there's a lot of battery problems with it, random shutdowns, boot loops, all those different things. But the Nexus 5 had an interesting thing. Some people were actually able to take out the 2,300 milliamp hour battery and put in the LG G2's 3,000 milliamp hour battery. So that's an interesting thing. I would definitely, if you're into that, if you're into modding your phone, this phone, not only can you mod the software, but you can mod the hardware as well. And that's a pretty cool thing. Not a lot of phones have that capability. So if you're into that, the Nexus 5 could potentially be one of those cool phones you're looking at. And the LG G2's batteries aren't even that expensive. But again, it's a huge mod. You're going to have to do a lot of research about it. Don't try it without looking at that. This phone doesn't have like a removable battery. You're going to have to manually unscrew everything and wire it all in. So do a little bit of research before you do that. But man, dude, some notable things to note. No USB Type-C. This thing does have wireless charging if you keep the stock battery. No IP certification. It's not waterproof at all. All nav buttons, no fingerprint sensor. I think I already said that. There was kind of a common problem with a little bit of crack by the power button in terms of the side of the phone. I did have a couple of Nexuses that had that, including some Nexus 5, so kind of do your research. It really doesn't hurt the phone at all, but just doesn't really look that good. This phone did come in 2 storage variants, 16 and 32 gigs, so if you're into having a 16 or 32 gig phone, you have that option. And overall, man, would I recommend the Nexus 5 in 2019? What I will tell you is, if you were able to make the Nexus 5 last as long as you did, and if you're still using it, shout out to you. I am surprised you're able to do that. And I think a couple years ago, or even last year, I even recommended people to buy it, but I would probably not recommend people to buy it anymore. And the reason being is because, one, It's a little bit old too. Even though there's software support, sometimes the ROMs can get buggy and stuff, and especially for the Nexus 5, even though there's quite a bit of community behind it, that doesn't necessarily mean those ROMs are 100% perfect or anything like that. Now, the main reason I would probably not recommend you to buy it right now is mostly because of the hardware problems. As I've stated before, I've owned a lot of phones. My LG phones tend to have the most amount of problems, especially the phones released from like 2011 to about 2015. A lot of those phones, not all of them, but some of them do have problems. The Nexus 5 is one of those. If you even look up Nexus 5 hardware problems, you'll find a whole list of people complaining about it. And because of that, I probably would not recommend buying a Nexus 5. That'd be really like bad on my part to recommend people to do that. But what I would recommend is not buy the Nexus 5, but go buy the Google Pixel XL or go buy a Google Pixel. Both of those phones will cost you less than $200, and they're very, very solid phones. They have amazing cameras, software support still kind of, I don't know if it's getting Android Q, but you can flash a custom ROM on it and be set. That's exactly what I would recommend you to do. Buy them on eBay or Craigslist, wherever, but I will leave a link in the description of the cheapest ones I find on Amazon, so you can buy them straight from there. Whatever you buy through those links actually helps the channel out too, so we can do more videos like this and do more giveaways, things like that. So buy everything you want through those links. It'll really mean a lot. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I would really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.